Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, where I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. And today we have another Caro Kann Defense, and my opponent goes for the two knights. Oh, there's several ways we can play against this. We can go g6 immediately. There's been a system I've been toying with of I think it goes like take g6, knight f6, and you look for a trade here to play f5, and you basically just get a really strong grip on the e4 square. But I think I'll play it in a more traditional manner and just go knight to f6. Now, yes, okay, so somebody in my comment section, I'm recording this a couple of days in advance of when it will be released, but a couple of days ago, someone in my comment section, if you're watching this video, say hi by the way, asked me about this exact line. I think Remote Chess Academy made a video about this from the white perspective. And after knight takes e4, because the threat from white is if knight b to d7, which is the most natural move to defend your knight, then knight d6 is checkmate, because the pawn is pinned to the king. So previously I've toyed with moves like e6 here, moves like taking, and after queen takes going knight to d7. But I've recommended to my commenter the move queen to d5, which I only discovered like maybe a couple of months ago, and I've been playing the Caro Kann for years at this point. So to only know this move now, I think it's important for me to emphasize how important a move this is, because this can become really difficult to play for the black pieces, because knight to d7 is probably the most common move in this position, and after like bishop c4, knight f6, it's really difficult to play with black. However, now my opponent actually accepts the queen trade, which is not very typical, because this is just good for us. I think black has to be better here. Bishop b5 also doesn't make sense. I think my opponent was planning knight c6 and knight e5 to be aggressive, but it just doesn't work. Bishop d7, a trade will always help us because we develop our knight, and we also open up the c-file for our rook. White will probably play a combination of c3 and d4 to secure the d-file and the d4 pawn. But these positions are just good for black. They are good for black, quite simply. And we'll see how my opponent responds. He may play a move like a4 to try and tempt me into taking and opening up his a-file. Of course, if white plays a4, what would you play here with the black pieces? You don't want to take, right? Because you're just helping white, and you may try and claim the pawn on b5 is weak, but how are you actually planning on winning that back? That's very, very difficult. I would personally play the move a6 and force white to make a decision. If he takes me, cool. The a4 move, yeah, white can put it on a5 and claim that it's a good pawn. It probably is, in fairness, but it could become a little bit loose later on in the game. And it will be difficult to support it with the b pawn, because white will probably put his other pawn on d4. So playing b4 would leave the c pawn behind and very, very vulnerable, because really this pawn should be going on c3 to support the d4 pawn. And my opponent's taking a bit of a think here, which is good, because clearly he was not expecting this for some reason. He does go a4, okay. We can even consider the move knight to c6 here. That wouldn't be idiotic at all. Maybe even threatening knight to b4. Maybe. Knight c6, I don't know. White can probably just take it and then put the knight in the center. So I think I prefer the move a6. And will force a trade like this. Of course, white could retreat his bishop. He could play something like bishop to e2, but that doesn't really make any sense. I don't think it makes sense anyway. I assume we just develop. We can probably even try to play the move e5 there, which would be quite good. Okay, he does take. Taking with the king. I mean, you could, but like, why? Okay. So d4 as expected. Rook c8 looks like a good move. White probably has to play c3. We could try and get our knight into the c4 square, but that's probably more of a long-term plan. Maybe we should do it before white goes a5. Maybe we should go a5 ourselves. There's lots of different things we can do here. although the queens have been traded and 2 sets of minor pieces have been traded, this game is far from over. Far from over. E6 is also a completely valid move, just looking to get the bishop out. I don't think we really have to castle. My dream setup might be something like bishop d6, king e7, or even the king on d7 is vulnerable to knight e5, so maybe not king d7. We could castle though. It's just we don't have to. Rook c8, c3 looks like the only move. Even then, I could maybe even lift my rook up, or even to c6, and try and get some activity going, but maybe it's better to go knight to b6 and try and put the knight on c4, because it's difficult to kick away. Let's start with rook c8. c3, I think, is the only move. And it's a perfectly reasonable move, because the pawn probably wants to go to c3 anyway, but even if it does, my rook is still decent on the c8 square. I am thinking of knight b6 immediately, because if I go e6, maybe white can go a5 and lock my knight out. However, I can always rotate the knight into e4, so if a5 is played, I can try and claim white's wasting time and play bishop to d6 immediately. I understand this move, of course. It makes complete sense, but it is leaving the b-pawn pretty weak. Leaves it pretty weak, so maybe I should go for it. Am I allowing knight to e5? Maybe. But the knight also isn't really targeting anything, even if it does go to e5. What's it looking at? The f7 pawn? Big whoop. Nothing's happening on f7. We're also targeting a4. White could play something like a5 and after knight c4, b3. But I think we probably just go knight d6 and essentially say, you know, your c3 pawn is very weak, a5 is weak, b3 is weak. You have a very difficult position to play, right? Because one of the beauties, or not one of the beauties, but one of the great things about the Caro Kann, that's a very strange move, because he just hung a rook. What? 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 He spent 35 seconds on that move. I assume he was planning to meet knight to c4 with rook b3, protecting and attacking. But I mean, thank you. I don't really understand. I mean, he obviously just missed the fact my bishop was attacking the a3 square for some reason. But even if he'd have played a better move there, I think the position was still very, very difficult to deal with. And hopefully that shows you just how strong the move queen d5 is. Because if we do a brief analysis, I won't make this video much longer than it has to be. Let me just pull up the analysis board. Sorry, I'm just going to switch the thing. One sec, there we go. So, of course, whoops. Okay, so, of course, we have a normal Caro Kann, right? Knight to c3. I've been toying with different lines here. There's lines like, oh, chess.com, don't do this to me, please. Don't do this to me. When you get the red error message, it messes with everything. I've been toying with lines like g6. Although, oh no, I think it's g6 in this position, sorry. And you can get some interesting positions where you go like take, take, knight f6, take, take. And if white continues to develop normally, basically the idea is that you put the pawn on f5. Not immediately, because for now the pawn actually does a really good job of restricting the white position. But in the long run, you want to put the pawn on f5, like now, and put the rook on e8. Maybe the knight goes to f6 to support the light squares in the center. And it's just an interesting position. But I thought we'd play it in a more typical manner with knight to f6. A lot of people will take on f6. This is just a good version of the Tartakower for black, because in the Tartakower, the knight doesn't really belong on f3 because it can be exploited by a bishop on g4. So if like a main line is played and you get something like this, then after something like castles, bishop g4, you can see it's completely equal, the position, because the knight is misplaced on the f3 square. The knight should go to the e2 square. So a lot of people will instead go queen to e2, knowing that the Tartakower line is no good if the knight is on f3. And here, take is the main move, because there's nothing else really that you can do. You can go bishop g4, but I find these positions very uncomfortable. Of course, you can't take with the e-pawn because the e-pawn is pinned to the king. That's one of the... Well, that's the whole point of queen e2, really. And, I mean, I just don't like this. Yeah, you can go queen d5 again, sure. And the computer recommends this line, but white has the bishop pair, and he's got a pretty good position. Instead, I like to take, and go queen d5 immediately, which... I think queen to a5 is also a move, knight d7 is also a move. The problem with knight d7 is after like bishop to c4, knight f6, there's knight e5, you can't take the queen because you get mated. So you have to go e6 here, and the problem is that you lock in your light squared bishop straight away. That kind of defeats the whole purpose of the Caro, and while the computer will tell you that this position is absolutely fine for black, this is clearly a very uncomfortable position to be playing. That's why instead, I recommend, well, I actually only found this out recently in all fairness, but I like the move queen to d5, just offering a queen trade immediately. Most people don't trade, and you can see, after white trades, the computer prefers the black position. Very, very slightly. It has to think about it, but the black position is a little bit better. Probably because development's a bit easier, and the c-file is pretty good. Most people decline the queen trade with a move like queen to h4, and you can play things like queen e6 check, bishop e2, queen g4. I think this is the main line to essentially force a queen trade because the white queen can't go anywhere. If take, then of course takes. Queen g3 can be played. This is what the computer likes. And you can just go ahead and take, play bishop g4, and you've just got a very easy position. A queenless middle game. Maybe you don't have to go bishop g4, maybe g6 is better, but you've got a game, an easy game on your hands. White has an open h-file, but you don't even have to take the queen immediately. Although you probably should, because maybe you don't want to allow queen to c7 ideas. Is that not a problem? Apparently the computer just ignores it, but you can just trade. Anyway, my opponent takes on d5, which was a very surprising decision. cd5, bishop b5 check, which just isn't very good. I assume he was expecting knight c6 and he wanted to go knight e5, but even then, I can just go bishop d7, and yeah, you've got some pressure here, sure, but we don't even have to enter that. We can just go for the immediate bishops to d7. And this makes our life very, very easy. I've just realized I had the sounds turned off, so sorry. Also, if you enjoyed the game, please drop a like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Bishop d7, offering a bishop trade. If take, obviously takes. My opponent plays pawn to a4, which I thought was a good idea. Because if take, you can see the computer prefers the white position by a good margin because of how active this rook is. Also, my position is a bit more restricted by this pawn. And like I said, how am I planning on winning this pawn back? My knight either has to get to c7 or d6 to target the pawn. Getting to c7 is difficult because I can't go to a6, and getting to d6, if you know the geometry between the knight and the d6 square, because there's two diagonal squares in between, basically, it takes, I think, 4 moves for the knight to get there, and that's in the best of circumstances. Like, we'd have to do some stupid maneuver like that, and obviously white could just disallow it with d4. How are we planning on getting to d6? Maybe that via this and trying to jump in like this, but white is better. White is better. So I go a6 instead and try to force white's hand. The computer preferred knight to f6, which I did consider. Why did I reject this? Well, there is d4. I thought that also white could go for something like this, although the computer... yeah, rightfully does prefer black here. The open B file is quite useful. Anyway, I go a6, keep things nice and simple. Knight takes is a slight better than king takes. You could argue the knight on c6 is better, so it's better to take with the king, but I didn't want to allow the knight into e5 because my king's a bit weird. So knight d7, d4, and the position's equal, but we go rook c8, targeting the c-pawn. c3, computer preferred king d1, but who's playing king d1? c3, e6. I did consider knight to b6. The computer doesn't like this, though, because of knight to e5. I instead go e6, bishop f4, and then knight b6. If knight to e5 in this position, it's probably just equal. But I would take black here, personally. I think the open c file is very useful. I think the open e file is not very useful. And I can try and launch a minority attack on the queen side at some point. But then again, like, you know, getting an equal position, a completely equal position after like 10 moves is very good with the black pieces. My opponent goes rook a3, though, and just hangs his rook. Now, I assume his point was knight c4, rook b3. This is what I think he was trying to do. Even here, though, the computer says b6, supported by the knight, of course, and this position is very tough to play with white. Knight e5, I have b5, apparently. If a b5, knight... The rook is trapped, basically, but that's also incredibly complicated. Obviously, my opponent just hung the rook for whatever reason, and then we take on c3. I mean, we could have taken on a4 too, and here my opponent resigns because obviously he has nothing. Like, the position is dead lost. I control the only open file. He can't do a single thing. So, another Caro Kann win. If you want to see another interesting Caro Kann game, check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.